Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Every now and again, my inbox explodes due to incoming emails, people suggesting stories, and quite often that happens because a lot of people are suggesting the same story. And here we have an update to a story I've talked about a couple times out of South Dakota involving their attorney general. And I'll tell you, I actually got some pushback on the last video I did on this a while back, but we'll talk about that in a second. Stephen Groves wrote this to the Associated Press. South Dakota Attorney General convicted on 2 impeachment charges over fatal crash. The South Dakota Senate convicted Attorney General Jason Ravensborg of 2 impeachment charges stemming from a 2020 fatal crash, removing and barring him from future office in a stinging rebuke that showed that most senators did not believe his account of the crash. Ravensborg is a first-term Republican who only recently announced he would not seek re-election. He showed little emotion as the senators convicted him first of committing a crime that caused someone's death. They then delivered another guilty verdict on a malfeasance charge that alleged that he misled investigators and misused his office. Ravensborg told a 911 dispatcher the night of the crash that he might have struck a deer or other large animal and has said he didn't know he struck a man. And he'd struck a 55-year-old man. And he said that he didn't realize it until he returned to the scene the next morning. Criminal investigators said they didn't believe some of his statements, and several senators made it clear they didn't either. There's no question that was a lie, said one senator, the chamber's top-ranking Republican. This person ran down an innocent South Dakotan. That same senator also criticized Ravensborg for declining to testify in his own defense, saying that he should have shared what the hell he was doing the night of the crash. There's a mic right there, and that's a damn short walk, he said. And so keep in mind that you cannot be forced to testify against yourself, but you can testify if you want to. And there are occasions where it might help you to testify because this is a situation where he was the one who knows what happened. The other person at the scene passed away. And so without him explaining what happened, people have got to piece it together. The convictions required a 2/3 majority in the Senate, and that is controlled 32-3 by Republicans. Senators mustered the bare minimum of 24 votes for conviction on the first charge, with some senators saying that the 2 misdemeanors he pleaded guilty to weren't serious enough crimes to warrant impeachment. But the malfeasance charge sailed through with 31 votes. And the malfeasance charge involves Ravensborg asking investigators what data could be found on his cell phone, among other things. Votes to bar him from future office taken on both counts were unanimous. Ravensborg showed little emotion throughout the voting process. He had his hand over his mouth, as he had for much of the trial. Then he was writing on a notepad in his lap. He did not answer questions from reporters as he exited the Capitol. Ravensborg, in September, agreed to an undisclosed settlement with the widow of the man he hit. Meanwhile, that man's cousin, who has been a constant advocate for a severe punishment for Ravensborg, said the votes were a vindication. It's just a relief. It's been nearly 2 years that this is drug on, and it just feels like a weight off my shoulders, he said. Ravensborg is the first official to be impeached and convicted in South Dakota history. The governor, who will pick the replacement until a candidate can be elected to replace him in November, called for her fellow Republican to resign soon after the crash and later pressed lawmakers to pursue impeachment. As the saga dragged on, the governor publicly endorsed Ravensborg's predecessor, Marty Jackley, for election as his replacement. The governor celebrated the impeachment conviction on Twitter, saying it had lifted the dark cloud over the Attorney General's office. It is now time to move on and begin to restore confidence in the office. She gave no indication as to who she will pick for the interim position. Ravensborg has argued that the governor, who has positioned herself for a possible 2024 White House bid, pushed for his removal in part because he had investigated ethics complaints against her. As the impeachment trial opened, prosecutors drove at a question that has hung over developments since the accident occurred in 2020. Did Ravensborg know he killed a man the night of the crash? Alexis Tracy, the Clay County State's attorney who led the prosecution, said he absolutely saw the man that he struck in the moments after. Prosecutors also told senators that Ravensburg had used his title to set the tone and gain influence in the aftermath of the crash, even as he allegedly made misstatements and outright lies to the crash investigators. Prosecution played a montage of audio clips of Ravensburg referring to himself as the Attorney General. Prosecuting attorneys probed his alleged misstatements during the aftermath of the crash, including that he never drove excessively over the speed limit, that he had reached out to the victim's family to offer his condolences, and that he had not been browsing his phone during his drive home. Prosecution played a series of video clips during the closing argument that showed his shifting account of his phone use during interviews with criminal investigators. The Attorney General at first outright denied using the phone while driving, but then acknowledged he had looked at his phone minutes before the crash. When it was time for senators to speak, several noted in accident reconstruction that found that Ravensburg's car had veered entirely out of its lane, in contrast to his initial statement that he was in the middle of the road at the time of the impact. And that is an important question because he hit a pedestrian. And if the pedestrian is in the middle of the road at night, that'd be a problem. Over on the shoulder, not a problem. That's where they're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be driving down the shoulder at night, but a pedestrian, that's where they're supposed to be. Ravensburg resolved the criminal case last year by pleading no contest to a pair of traffic misdemeanors, including making an illegal lane change and using a phone while driving, despite the fact he earlier said he hadn't done it and he said he might have done it. And he admits to being guilty of it. So the Attorney General's defense asked senators to consider the implications of impeachment on the function of state government. A legal analyst and law professor at Tulane University who specializes in these proceedings told senators to impeach would be undoing the will of the voters. Well, they voted for the guy before the crash happened. And the question is, if you ask people to vote now, how would that go? Because it probably is not undoing the will of the voters in this case. Ravensburg was driving home from a political fundraiser after dark, September 12, 2020, on a state highway in central South Dakota when his car struck something, according to a transcript of his call to 911 afterwards. He told the dispatcher it might have been a deer or other animal. Investigators identified what they thought were slips in Ravensburg's statement, such as when he said he turned around at the accident scene and saw him before quickly correcting himself and saying, "I didn't see him." And they contended that the victim's face had come through the windshield because his glasses were found in the car. And you'd think that would be an indication of something. We've heard better lies from 5-year-olds, said Pennington County State's Attorney Mark Vargo, who was one of the impeachment prosecutors. Investigators had determined the Attorney General walked right past the victim's body and the flashlight the victim had been carrying, which was still illuminated the next morning as he looked around the scene the night of the crash. Ravensburg said neither he nor the county sheriff who came to the scene knew that the victim's body was laying just feet from the pavement on the highway shoulder. And so, I've done several videos about this. I'm not going to beat on this too much because the real update here is the impeachment, right? But the guy's driving home from fundraiser late at night out in the country and collides with a pedestrian. He calls it in and says, "I think I hit a deer or some other animal." And it's the next day that he goes back out to the scene and walking around, and apparently that's when he finds the victim's body. And he says that until that moment, he had no idea that he'd hit a person. And I had said before that seemed highly unlikely because the victim's glasses wound up inside his car. And even if the victim didn't wind up inside the car, for the man's glasses to get into the car would implicate some kind of collision where the victim hit the windshield of the car, or at least was in front of the car in some way that the driver should have seen him. And again, I mentioned that I did a video previously and people were writing me saying, "Steve, you weren't there. You don't know what happened." Well, you weren't there either. We have the facts though. And the facts are he hit a guy. And he says he wasn't sure what he hit. Now, I got news for you. As you're driving down the road, not playing on your phone, but watching what's in front of you and being aware of your surroundings, you should be able to recognize the fact that you are about to, and then you do, hit a human being that's walking down the side of the road. Especially if during the impact, the glasses that the victim is wearing wind up on the floor of your car. And there is not an innocent explanation for that in any universe. There is not. And the idea that I had people complaining saying, oh, see, there's all kinds of good explanations for this. Really? No, there's not. There's not. So he's been impeached. And just so you remember, impeachment is the process. And once they begin it, they say you've been impeached, right? But he's been convicted after impeachment. So he was impeached on 2 counts, convicted on both counts. And as a result, he's out of office. He's out of office. And that ends this saga that began a couple years ago at the side of the road out in South Dakota. So there's a story by Stephen Groves in the Associated Press. South Dakota Attorney General convicted on 2 impeachment charges over fatal crash. Sent to me by Bill, Ben, Peter, Robert, Roy, Dave, Tony, Nathan, Michael, Andrew, Josie, A.H., Dennis, and Christoph. Thanks a lot. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Rest and be kind. You don't have to prove anything.